You're such a great new addition to the United States Senate, and I'm disappointed that you're not able to unleash your legislative prowess and move us forward, but we'll get past this. We'll get past it if we can work together. Thank you very much, and I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Alabama.
Madam President, I want to share some remarks about the comments and want to say that Senator Box is a great advocate and does a good job as chair of our committee, Environment and Public Works, and pretty much we've had unanimous votes on bills that come out, Republicans and Democrats voting unanimously on the bills that have been coming out. And so sometimes we all have differences and we fight over them, but a lot of times things are getting done around here that we can work on. But I would just say it's not actually fully correct to say the Republicans opposed the President's health care bill, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. The American people opposed it by huge numbers. And they, through a remarkable election and some very close wins, found themselves with 60 votes in the Senate of the United States, and they had a majority in the House, and they decided to move this bill, and they shut out Republicans, moved a partisan bill, and they got it through. Even when Scott Brown, if you remember, was running for the Senate in Massachusetts to fill the late Senator Kennedy's seat, and he promised he would be the vote that would deny the 60 votes and stop this bill, and he won in Massachusetts. But he couldn't get here quick enough. They were able to get the bill passed before he got here to kill it. So this has never been a popular bill. And the polling number shows it's even less popular today than it was when they rammed it through. And so this is not a little bitty matter, and it threatens the republic, I think, in a lot of different ways, and I've talked about that earlier. But I would just say, to understand the dynamics on the floor of the Senate, you have to understand that the majority leader, having got his bill passed on Christmas Eve 2009, after all kinds of maneuvers to get that accomplished, has protected it from any further debate and discussion. He has blocked any ability to bring up the legislation and be able to amend it and fix some of the obvious flaws in it. And one of the top drafters, the chairman, the Democratic chairman of the Finance Committee, has called it a train wreck, and it needs at least reform. It really can't succeed in its present form. So Senator Reid has blocked any effort to bring up a bill and fix it. So American people might find that hard to believe, but I would repeat, since that time, there's been numerous efforts on behalf of members of this side to call up amendments and call up legislation to alter, amend, and replace the Obamacare legislation, and he has utilized parliamentary maneuvers, filling the tree, to block that. And so it can't continue. This thing is about to become a law. It's going to hammer the American economy. It's already hammering the economy. The American people don't want it, and we're not going to go silently in this. And so this is the beginning of the fight. Senator Cruz, maybe people can disagree with his tactics, but he drove the issue. He raised the issue, and we need to keep talking about it. We just do. And it's time for this Congress to listen to the voice of the American people. Now, you know, Senator Box sees a good partisan when she wants to be, and she said that President Bush had $1 trillion deficits and President Obama has reduced them in half. The highest deficit President Bush ever had in the 8 years he served as president was $487 billion, which is a lot of money, too much. The year before it was $168. President Obama took office. What was the first thing that was passed within weeks? $1 trillion stimulus bill that's supposedly to stimulate the economy, but really it was money that went out to government agencies and departments and had no stimulus impact, really. at all, but it was $1 trillion, every penny of which was borrowed. That year, the deficit went up well over $1 trillion. The next year, well over $1 trillion. The next year, well over $1 trillion. The next year, well over $1 trillion. The first 4 years of President Obama's leadership, we had the highest deficits ever recorded in America. It's a stunning event. And he fought every day, and there were fights on the floor to spend more and borrow more. And some of his advisors would say, well, the reason this economy isn't growing so well, we didn't borrow and spend enough. Didn't have enough. We should have created more debt and spend more. But it's resulted to this date in the lowest rebound economically from a recession since World War II. And we're not doing well in that regard. It's just absolutely not so that President Obama bears no responsibility for the unprecedented debt that he has run up during this time. And he still is advocating for $1 trillion more in spending above the Budget Control Act levels that he agreed to in 2011, in the summer of 2011, the Budget Control Act. He wants to spend $1 trillion more than what he signed as an agreement to raise the debt ceiling. He agreed. I know he didn't want to, but Congress said, we're going to cut back on your credit card. Now, we're going to raise the debt ceiling $2 trillion, as you say you need, but we're going to demand that you reduce the growth of spending over 10 years by $2 trillion. We were projected to have spending grow to $10 trillion over the current rate of spending, which is about $3.6 trillion a year. We were going to increase it a total of $10 trillion. We would have increased it we will increase it under BCA if we adhere to it by $8 trillion, not $10 trillion. That is not going to bankrupt America. There's no reason we can't run this government by growing the spending by $8 trillion and instead of 10. So that's unbelievable that we make that point. And I know the budget bounced in the last of the 90s, and President Clinton proudly claims credit for that, and he was a part of it. But I haven't forgotten that the Republican House was in a constant battle over the Democratic President Clinton's spending levels, and there was actually a fairly long shutdown of the government containing the growth of spending, and it resulted in a balanced budget. That's how it happened. There was credit enough to go on both sides of that. So, we need health care reform. It needs to be smartly, effectively done. We can improve a lot of conditions in our country, but it does not have to tank the American economy. And that's what's been happening in recent days. And I really was going to talk about that, and without much reference to the Obamacare and the health care bill, which is a negative factor on economic growth of very large proportions. But I just followed my friend and able colleague, Senator Box, and I wanted to share those points. Last Thursday, I delivered the first in a series of speeches looking at the state of our economy. I've directed my staff on the Budget Committee, I'm the ranking Republican there, to specifically analyze conditions facing working Americans so that I could share those findings directly with the members of the Senate. Both parties need to focus our efforts on defending working Americans from policies, Washington policies too often, that damage their financial well-being. It's happening. Last week I discussed the falling incomes and social challenges eroding the security of the middle class. Today I'll focus on the jobless recovery and the general problem of unemployment. Few things matter more to a working family than the pace of the economy, especially after a hard recession. If, on the one hand, it's a rapid, strong recovery, jobs will return quickly, people will return to the workforce, and a great deal of social suffering will be averted. If, on the other hand, it's a slow recovery, then businesses don't create many new jobs, wages stagnate or fall as they've been doing, and families continue to borrow from their savings to pay their bills. Life is spent wondering and worrying about the future. We live today in the slowest economic recovery. They called it an economic recovery since the recession, but it's the slowest one since the end of World War II. No recovery from a recession since the end of World War II has been as slow as this one. Not counting the Great Recession, we've had 11 recessions since 1945. 11 recessions since 1945. All had faster, stronger recoveries than this one. All of them, we bounced back quicker. Just how slow is this economic recovery? Well, it's been nearly 6 years since the recession began in December of 2007. We still have not returned to the number of jobs we had 6 years ago. We haven't come back to the number of people working that we had 6 years ago. We are 1,988,000 jobs, almost 2 million, short of the 146,273,000 jobs we had when the recession began. This is not good. Let's compare that with the other two really bad post-war recessions, the contractions of 1973 through 75 and 1981 and 1982. Serious recessions. The recession of 1972 lasted 16 months. The recession of 1981, after that collapse, lasted 16 months. And the recession of 2007 lasted until June of 2009, or 18 months. Working people were hit hard by these two recessions, these earlier recessions. The unemployment rate rose to 9% in 1975 and 10.8% in 1982. The highest monthly unemployment rate for the Great Recession of 2007 to 2009 was 10%. Our unemployment rate didn't hit as high as 1982. Not much difference in the severity and length of these recessions. They're pretty similar. Even so, total jobs had recovered by 26 months after the start of the 1973 recession and by 28 months after the start after the recovery from the 1981 recession. It has been 70 months, however, since the start of the 2007 recession, and unemployment has not yet recovered. Lost hours of work is another and even better way to gauge the failure of an economy and a recovery. It's not simply the number of jobs that in the economy, but the number of hours worked that strongly influences the pace of economic activity. In the fourth quarter of 2007, just as the recession was starting, Americans worked about 236 billion hours. That's a lot of hours, 236 billion hours. We still have not returned to that level. In the third quarter of 2013, this last quarter, the Labor Department estimated Americans still only work 232 billion hours. That's a shortfall of 3.5 billion hours. And the decline is greater per worker since the population of available workers has increased by 9 million. So we've got 9 million more workers and a decline in the number of hours worked, still well below what the number was in 2007. This is not the kind of recovery we need to be looking for. Still, another way to show the slowness of this recovery is to measure how much higher GDP, the economy, is today compared to the start of the recession. It turns out that economic output is 4.4% higher Compare this with the 1973 and 1981 recessions. By this time, after the 1973 recession, GDP was 17.9% higher. And GDP after the 1981 recession by this time was 20% higher. That is, the economy was 20% bigger by this time after the 1981 recovery. Our current economy is only 4.4% larger. The 1981 economic gains were 5 times as great as this. These are the top line numbers. What do they mean to real people? Below this surface, we find extensive economic suffering throughout our nation. There are 25% more discouraged workers today, 988,000 versus 793,000 than there were in June of 2009 when the recession ended. We had 366,000 discouraged workers when the recession started in 2007, which means we've had an increase of 172% in this sad number in 6 years. One of the most stunning developments of this recovery has been the decline in the labor force participation rate. This is a fundamental indicator of the breadth and depth of a recovery and an economic growth. Today, 58.7% of non-institutionalized population, 16 years of age and older, are working. 58.7% today. In 2007, that number stood at 62.7%. The current rate of labor force participation is the lowest this nation has seen since 1975. The percentage of the population working today in the age group of workers is the lowest since it's been since 1975. And it's not getting better. This decline is due to 2 factors: increased unemployment and labor force dropouts. Discouraged people who are no longer even looking for work. How many people are we talking about? If the same percentage of population were working today as was working in 2007, we would have 154,089,000 workers. Since we currently have only 144 million people working, it appears that 9,804,000 people are out of the labor force. 9 million that we would normally be expected working are out of the labor force. And when they're out of the labor force, it does not show up in the unemployment rate. It's only people who are actually applying for jobs that show up in the unemployment rate. And so the unemployment rate we see today hides the real depth of the unemployment problem we have in America. One of the 5.7 million, of the 5.7 million who've totally dropped out, more retirements and more disability than in 2007 explains about 2/3 of those dropouts. People went on disability, went on retirement. Many of them went on retirement at 62 when they really would have been better if they could have had a decent job opportunity to work to 65, 66, 70. But they've dropped out because they're older workers perhaps and just not able to find a decent work. But it cannot be good for America for millions of people to take their Social Security at 62 rather than later, too often because no work is available. More than 4 million unemployed Americans have been out of work for more than 27 weeks. 4 million, more than half the year they've been unemployed. All told, 11.5 million Americans want work but cannot find jobs. The unemployment rate for those between the ages of 16 and 19 who are not in school or in the military or in prison stands at 24%. So teenagers have a very large number, and the number is much higher for minority teenagers and young men. particularly. This is the highest teenage employment rate that has ever been this far in a recovery. It's very dangerous for our society to have so many young people, especially young men whose rates are even higher, unemployment rates are even higher than females, out of work. This is not good for America. We need to be having a growing economy that creates jobs. And we don't need to be bringing in, under the immigration bill that passed this Senate, we don't need to be bringing in twice the number of low-skilled workers that we've been doing, and we have a generous immigration policy. This bill would double the number of guest workers coming into America to take jobs that our children need to be doing. They need to be working. We don't need teenagers and young people, 19, 20, 22, 23, with nothing to do, month after month, year after year. So at 13%, unemployment among African Americans is about twice the national average of 7.4%. Unemployment among Hispanics stands at 9.4%. Unemployment among those with less than a high school education is 11%. Now, we want to bring in really millions of people without high school education to compete for the few jobs that are out there. Again, these statistics, as bad as they are, mask the real-life implications of the slow economy. These are young careers that have failed to launch when they should, marriages perhaps put off until the economy improves, families not started until couples can afford generation or children that arrive out of wedlock. They mean retirements taken too early, loss of homes perhaps, older children at home who should be out on their own, and we would normally expect them to be working, and lots of part-time extra jobs at lower pay just to make ends meet. Indeed, one of the most devastating statistics is the growth in part-time work instead of full-time work. It's a stunning number. We have 5,188,000 fewer full-time jobs today than in December of 2007. 5 million fewer. That equals a decrease in full-time employment of 4.3%, even though our population is growing. At the same time, part-time employment has grown by 3 million over the same time period. That's an increase in part-time jobs of 13%. So make no mistake, the total number of jobs since 2007 is down. And for the people who are finding work, the work they find too often can only be part-time. 77% of the people that got a job since January of this year got a part-time job, not a full-time job. And when you see, colleagues, the reports that we added 190,000 jobs, 170, 200,000 jobs, remember 77% of those are part-time jobs. Those numbers hide the reality of the danger in our workforce. Nearly 90% of the increase in part-time work represents people who, according to the Labor Department, quote, could only find part-time work, close quote. In other words, they'd like full-time work, but could only find part-time work. At the end of 2007, this number stood at 1.2 million. However, the most recent data shows that this population has grown by 127% to 2,714,000. 127% increase in this number. Job growth in the economy since 2007 has been principally in part-time work. We are becoming a part-time economy. And the President's health care law, without any doubt, I don't believe any economist, even if they try to sugarcoat it best they could, would deny that the President's health care law is playing a major factor in the shift from full-time work to part-time work. And as we all know, part-time workers don't enjoy the same health, retirement, vacation, and other benefits as full-time workers do. It's exceedingly hard indeed to succeed in this economy and in a career with only a part-time job. So we must recognize one of the biggest contributors to the decline in full-time jobs is the health care bill we've been debating. As others have observed, it is destroying the 40-hour work week. That's what a union leader said. It's destroying the 40-hour work week. It's even an assault on workers. Let me tell you about one constituent who wrote my office, Linda Askew from Sheffield, Alabama, wrote in July asking Congress to do something to help. She has a small neighborhood business. She employed less than 10 people. According to Ms. Askew, quote, "We have been here for almost 50 years. We have tried to help our employees have health care for over 10 years now. The new premiums are $590 per month for single coverage and $1,520 for family coverage. These costs are almost becoming unbearable for our economy." More troubling than that is that the letter, and she got a letter from our insurance company, that said part of the reason for this increase was blamed on the new health care law, reform fees and taxes that health insurers must pay on behalf of all their groups. So to reduce the cost of health care in America, the health care bill raised taxes on the people, the insurance companies who provide it. It just gets passed along. Small businesses cannot keep up with these increases, she said. So in the coming days, as I document the conditions facing American workers, I'll also address the many causes of this economic deterioration. And there are many. There are many causes for the deterioration in the economy. Republicans and Democrats need to heed these problems I have stated. And the decline in wages began in 1999 through different administrations. The decline in workforce participation goes back to 1975. So the question is, what are we going to do about it, Republicans and Democrats? We need to consider these issues and deal with them. What we're seeing is immensely troubling. As Washington grows larger, Washington grows wealthier and more powerful, American workers are being impoverished, sidelined, and marginalized. Did you see the numbers that the only area of America that's been showing wage growth is Washington? Washington, from the government class is being enriched at the expense of the middle class. From deficit spending to federal regulation to the immigration bill, Washington is pursuing policies that benefits lobbyists, the well-connected government employees, regulators, and bureaucrats, but that are reducing the wages and job opportunities for everyday American workers. The numbers are clear. Both parties need to shut out the special interest, work to develop policies that will restore our history of dynamic economic growth, and we can do so. Growth that benefits all the people of our nation. So what is the response we get from the governing class? What do they tell us the problem is? On the deficit, what do they say the problem is? You haven't sent enough money. It's your problem, American people. Just send us more money and we won't have deficits anymore. Trust us. Send us more money. The President proposed a $1 trillion tax increase in his budget. It was rejected, but that's what he proposed and that's what he advocates for. So they want to spend more. They believe they can invest. You give the government more money, and it's going to invest in the economy, and everybody's going to be better off. But we've seen that movie. It's been going on for 5 years to a degree unprecedented in the history of America. They say, don't worry, borrow and spend. Don't worry about the debt. We can just borrow more and spend money, and that'll stimulate the economy. They say we need to regulate more. We need to block more American energy and import more, I suppose, from Venezuela Saudi Arabia. And that's going to improve our economy. We're going to drive up the cost of energy and coal. That's going to improve jobs in America. That's going to make a working person who now got to pay $200 a month for his gas bill to commute, $250. So that's supposed to be good for us? So all we've heard is more taxes, more regulation, more government, more debt. And that's the policy we've been seeing here. I haven't seen anything that really has the power to produce growth and prosperity that we need. And so I say, Madam President, we've got to get over this. We've tried this. It's not working. These policies have made it worse. So we've got to get back to classical American policies that validate individual responsibility, that allow people to progress and make more, that don't drive us to import more oil, that don't put regulations by massive numbers all over the economy, driving down productivity and driving up cost. That's the kind of thing we need to be doing. And if we'll do that, and if we allow the vitality of the American spirit to flourish and flower and get this burden off their back, I think we'll be surprised how much better things can be. But it's a serious crisis. The trend's been going on far too long. We can't ignore it. We can't say it's just a recession. We've been going a long time since 2007. We have not seen the growth we need. The tax and spend and borrow policies haven't worked, and so it's time for us to confront that. I hope my colleagues will. I'll continue to examine the data that we're seeing out there and share it with us all, and maybe we can surprise ourselves how much good we can do in the long run. Thank you, Madam President. I would yield the floor.
Senator from Missouri.
Thank the President for recognizing me and allowing me to follow the remarks that I agree with that Senator Sessions just made. I mean, I'm disappointed at what happened this week. Those of us on the minority learned another lesson of the minority is to get to a bill we wanted to get to. The majority then has the votes to amend that bill unless some of the majority would happen to decide with us. And they did amend the bill in ways that I didn't agree with, taking the provisions out that would have defunded the move toward the health care plan that I think we're going to see more and more the country isn't ready for. But the bill did go back to the House. The bill was changed from the bill that the House sent over, and so the bill went back to the House. They have a chance to see what else they might be able to do, and hopefully in the next few days between now and the end of the fiscal year, which is Monday, by the way, Madam President, hopefully we'll find a way to do some things that will make the system work better, will do what we should have done in the budget debate process. As I said here on the floor just a day or two ago, the great disappointment is that over and over again we fail to let the process work. Over and over again we fail to bring the bills to the floor, offer amendments, set the priorities for the country. And so here it is, the last Friday of the spending year, the last Friday of our budget year, the last Friday of the fiscal year, and the Senate has not passed one single appropriations bill, except the 6-week CR that says we can't decide how to do anything new, so let's just do for another 6 weeks what we did last year. Surely that's not good enough, and we need to get beyond that. The vote today taken on the Senate floor didn't send a bill to the President to be signed, sent a bill back across the Capitol building to see what the House of Representatives may want to do next, and I look forward to working with them and with my colleagues here in the Senate to see what that might be. I want to talk for a few minutes, Madam President, about the debt ceiling itself. The White House announced just in the last few days that we'd reached that debt ceiling in about 3 weeks. That number always seems to me to be pretty much a number that can be worked with. It's not like the end of the fiscal year, but it is a date that the Secretary of Treasury said we need to look at. And the President said he would not negotiate on the debt ceiling. That's really a very interesting position to take, and it's what's wrong with the government right now. I suppose the Congress could now say, and we won't negotiate on the debt ceiling either. So maybe that just means we don't have a debt ceiling increase because nobody wants to negotiate. Then the President said at a group in Washington this week that I think he said that non-budget items have never been attached to the debt ceiling before. And so I'm going to include at the end of my remarks an article from the Washington Post of just a few days ago by Glenn Kessler, who actually looks at that. Is that really accurate? Is what the President said accurate? We've never done this before? That this is totally new? That this is a new demand that no Congress has ever made before? Except, by the way, the Budget Control Act 2.5 years ago that the President signed, and a few other things that have happened. But it has happened before, and I want to talk about that a little bit. This is not a new moment for us. When members of the Congress have been concerned about spending certainly since the 1970s Budget Act, but even before that, when the debt ceiling had to be increased, members of Congress wanted to talk about spending and other things that they couldn't get attention to any other way. In 1953, during the Eisenhower administration, fiscal conservatives in the Congress, at that time led by a Democrat from Virginia, Harry Byrd, didn't believe that we'd be able to fund the interstate highway system. And so they used the debt limit vote, the debt limit debate, as a place to try to find out what they could do about the interstate highway system and how it was going to be funded. And 1953, this is a long time ago, almost longer now than the lifetime of most members of the Senate, but that's how it was used then. In 1973, when Richard Nixon was president, Democrats in the Senate sought to attach a campaign finance bill to the debt ceiling. This was during Watergate, and of course, I guess that would certainly meet the definition of a non-budget item, a campaign finance bill, that there was a great effort to do in 1993 and add to the debt ceiling, in 1973 rather. In 1993, a study of the politics of the debt limit for the Public Administrative Review said that during the past period, the genesis of a pattern developed that would eventually become full-blown in the 70s and 80s, using the debt ceiling vote as a vehicle for other legislative matters. So certainly that's something we could talk about. Some would have economic consequence, others wouldn't. I know one thought is let's not move forward with the individual mandate in health care. Now, if you don't move forward with the mandate, there may be significant advantages in the pressure that takes off the spending in the exchange, but whether it's an economic issue or not, it's a fairness issue. The President, who now has suspended the requirement that businesses offer insurance in 2015, seems to me the only fair thing to do if you take the obligation off businesses to offer insurance is to take the obligation off individuals who the law would require to have insurance if they didn't get it at work. You've just taken away the work. Surely you can't justify saying businesses don't have to pay the penalty, but individuals do. I think that that's a fair debate to have. It's a fair debate to have either over the weekend as part of how we move forward with funding the government, or a fair debate to have if we're going to increase the federal government's ability to borrow money, we ought to talk about things that are going to result in spending lots of money. Remember, the requirement for the individual mandate that the President also waived was the requirement to be able to prove income. Now, why does that matter? On the exchange, if your income is, depending on how high your income is, you get taxpayer subsidy for the insurance you buy. But the President said the requirement to verify income won't be there in the way the law envisioned for this first year. So, again, how's that fair to the taxpayers? That the taxpayers are subsidizing somebody's estimate of income. We just got through with the taxpayers subsidizing a lot of mortgages that couldn't be paid because that structure allowed people to estimate what their income would be on their mortgage application without submitting anything but their estimate of what their income could be. As it turned out, when people are trying to buy a house and prove they can make a mortgage payment, a significant number of people estimated that they would make more money than they made. I think it's going to be equally true that when it comes time to qualify for taxpayer assistance, a significant number of people may estimate, maybe even in some level of good faith, it could work out that way, that I'm going to make less money than I made last year or less money than I'm likely to make this year, but I'm going to have a level of income that allows me to have a higher subsidy. I think it's certainly a possibility that we, in one of these two things that are happening right now, need to look at the equity and fairness of having an individual penalty and the President saying we don't have a penalty for businesses that don't provide insurance. Let me get back to a few more examples. In one of the debt limit debates, major changes in Social Security were attached. An amendment in one of the debates was to end the bombing in Cambodia. 25 amendments that were non-germane to spending were in this discussion between 1978 and 1987. The President maybe is proving here more than anything else that you better be very careful when you say something has never happened, particularly if it's happened over and over again, and particularly if you think that somehow as President you can decide that the future of the country is non-debatable, that you can decide that how high the debt limit is non-debatable. Whatever the Secretary of the Treasury says, that's what we need, and what would the President say about that? He'd say, well, that's because we've already obligated this money. Doesn't mean the fact that this money may be already obligated doesn't mean that we shouldn't look at every other way we're spending money or every way we control spending and do what we need to do about that. 1982, the Senate Majority Leader at that time, Howard Baker, just said we'll have a free-for-all on the debt limit ceiling, the debt ceiling, and 1,400 non-germane amendments became part of that debate, and they included limiting federal jurisdiction over school prayer and other things. In 1980, the House and Senate rejected a central part of President Carter's energy policy, the oil import fee, as part of the debt ceiling discussion. No bigger stretch than not going forward with the individual mandate as part of the debt ceiling discussion. Less than 10% of the debt bills passed between 1978 and 2002 contained amendments not limited to the debt or budget, but many of them contained an amendment that was limited to how we spent our money. When you're spending too much money, when you already owe $17 trillion, it's time to talk about how are we spending this money and what can we do to do something about it before we further extend the line of credit. If any of us went to a banker and said, you know, we spent all the money we've already borrowed, we've already still got a lot of bills coming in, we need to borrow a lot more money, frankly, under any of the rules that this Congress has passed in the last several years, the banker couldn't loan you money, and if they could loan you money, they wouldn't loan you money without saying, and tell us again, what are you trying to do to get your spending under control so you're not back here in a few days or a few months asking for more credit? Now, the thing we know is that under almost any imaginable circumstance, this is not the last debt ceiling increase we'll ever make. So if we're going to be back, it's in a few weeks, a few months, a year, however long this debt ceiling extends to, asking for more money, we ought to be talking about how we're spending the money we have. October the 17th won't be as far away as it might seem. It's very close to us now. The Secretary of Treasury says that the country will have only approximately $30 billion to meet our country's commitments. But on October the 17th, money doesn't stop coming in. On October the 18th, you might be able to arrange the books in a way that you don't have quite enough money to pay all the bills going out. But this is not a government shutdown scenario. We need to solve the problem of this weekend and early next week, and then get to the debt ceiling, and whether the president wants to debate it or not, it's going to be debated. And I think it's going to be negotiated. And the idea that this is going to be a so-called clean debt limit increase that won't be negotiated because it impacts the full faith and credit of the United States of America. We're going to pay our bills, Madam President. I think we all know that. We've paid our bills since the founding of this government, but we're not going to pay our bills. We're not going to get another advance on our allowance without somebody saying, exactly how are you spending this money as fast as you're spending it, and why are you back again saying you need more of it? The American people have overwhelmingly rejected the idea that this shouldn't be negotiated. A new Bloomberg poll out this week, Americans by a 2-to-1 ratio disagreed with the president's contention that the Congress should raise the debt ceiling without conditions. Instead, 61% said that it's the right thing to do to require spending cuts when the debt ceiling is raised, and they said even if it risks default. The American people want us to fight, as we have this week, to try to, and will continue to try to defund a health care system that won't work, but they also want us to fight to be sure that the money we're spending that we get from taxpayers, the money that we obligate future generations to, the bills that we are building up for somebody else to pay, have the kind of debate, the kind of negotiation, the kind of important view of the future that they deserve to have. And I would urge the President and the Majority Leader of the Senate to sit down with the House and others and try to work this out as soon as we can, and just understand, frankly, that whether you want to negotiate or not doesn't really matter. There's nowhere in the Constitution that says when we owe more money than we pay, the President can decide whether there's going to be a discussion or not. That is not how this system works. It's not how it's going to work over the next 2 weeks or the next month or whatever it takes to resolve the debt limit, and hopefully we'll all be working hard over the next 2 days to do whatever it takes to keep the government of the United States of America working on October the 1st. Just because we have failed for the entire year to do the work that the Senate is supposed to do doesn't mean we can continue to fail in a way that punishes the American people by not having a government that's functioning on the first day of the spending year. And with that, Madam President, I notice the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Thank you.